I thoroughly enjoyed Bernie. It slowed down a little bit in the middle, but generally speaking, I found this to be quite an experience. This was released in 2011. It's directed by Richard Linklater. It's written by Linklater and Skip Hollandsworth. And it's based on the article Midnight in the Garden of East Texas by Skip Hollandsworth. And this stars Jack Black as Bernie. We also have Shirley MacLaine as Margie. And this is based on a true story. And I'd never heard of the true story. I might have come across it at some point. I read a lot of articles about true crime, so I might have heard it, but I certainly had no recollection. And I don't know how much information to give. So I will be a bit vague with what it's about, but if you do any Googling of this, you'll probably find out quite quickly what happens. It's basically about a friendship between Bernie, the mortician or funeral director, and Margie. And Margie is a very wealthy widow. And she's eccentric. She's quite a character, but she's very difficult to be around. And Bernie seems quite soft and gentle and not outspoken. He's not going to just turn around and tell her that she's difficult. And that ultimately causes some problems. And I won't say any more than that, but as I said, it is based on true crime. So it gets dark, and this is a dark comedy. The opening scene is absolutely brilliant. Bernie is giving a mortuary cosmetology demonstration, and it was quite a strong opening. And then the mockumentary style kicks in. Now, ordinarily, I'm not a huge fan of mockumentaries. I think with watching The Office, though, I've just kind of grown to get used to it a little bit more. So I didn't mind the mockumentary style. I thought it worked quite well. And the narrative, the pacing is not too bad, but as I said, it does slow down a little bit towards the middle. And then the thing happens. I don't want to say what it is in case you're unaware, but as I said, if you even slightly look into this film online, you'll probably find out quite quickly what happens between Bernie and Margie. And yeah, it does slow down a little bit in the first half, but after the thing happens, which I think is about halfway through, I could be wrong, but it's a decent way in. And then the second half of the film is kind of the aftermath, and I didn't know what happened. After that, I had a very basic knowledge of what this was about going into it. I don't know if it's completely factually accurate. If anybody has any information on that, please feel free to share. I think I will. I've done a tiny bit of reading about this after watching the film, but I think I'd like to go and do some more because it's definitely really fascinating, really, really interesting. And the second half of the film I thought was really solid, very well executed with a much better pacing as well. Jack Black gave a brilliant performance. I don't know exactly how close this Bernie is to the real Bernie, but certainly I enjoyed watching the performance, and across the board everybody did a great job. The dark comedy really appeals to me. It definitely worked really well. And as I said, the mockumentary style was not initially something that I knew I'd like or not. As I said, I'm not really a huge fan of mockumentaries, but having recently started to watch The Office, maybe about a year ago, I've kind of got a little bit more used to it, and I think it works quite well. So I really enjoyed this. I thought Bernie was funny. It was in some ways unpredictable because I didn't know how certain things came about. And that meant that there were some things that I didn't know how they'd happen, and I was keen to see it in the film, and definitely it was quite surprising. So if you go into this with no knowledge of what it's about, I think it could be quite surprising. And maybe that's the way to go. I went in with a basic knowledge, and I enjoyed that because I wasn't sure how things would end up, and I enjoyed the experience, did some reading about it afterwards. And for me, doing it that way worked really well. Visually, a very striking film. The characters are great, very well filmed, very well shot. The pacing in the second half is brilliant. The pacing in the first half is okay. It's not terrible, but it was a little slow in places. Very strong start. The execution is pretty decent, and if it sounds like something that might appeal to you, if you're interested in darker comedies, or indeed if you're keen to find out what happened with Bernie and Margie, then I'd say Bernie is definitely worth watching. I'd like to watch it again. I don't say that about films often because if I'm going to spend the time watching a film, usually I'd like to watch something I haven't seen before so I can have that new experience and new learning opportunities. But this one, I would be keen to watch it again at some point. I may just do that, and needless to say, I'm very happy to recommend Bernie.